You're listening to the Reds Podcast.
This is episode number 4. When you put something out there to the public, you're going to deal with feedback. Sometimes it's good, sometimes not so good. Should you listen to it? Should you respond? And how do you move forward from it? That's next on Red Podcast.
This is the Red Podcast. Real entrepreneur development. Make more money. Work less and live a life of freedom. No BS advice that really works. Here's your hosts, David Hooper and Laurel Staples.
So Laurel, you know who else just started a brand new podcast?
Ooh.
Tim Ferriss.
Tim Ferriss, 4-hour work week, man.
4-hour work week. And strangely enough, he's got a 4-hour podcast, literally. It is so long. The first episode is like almost 2 hours.
Wow, that is half of the 4-hour work week.
That's half the 4-hour work week. It's like an hour and 45 minutes, I think. Anyway, guy was asking for feedback, which I think is really smart.
Tim Ferriss was asking for feedback?
Yeah, believe it or not, right? So he releases the first episode of the podcast, and he says, hey, guys, if you got any thoughts on it, let me know. I need to know whether or not I need to keep doing it. So I want to bring up a couple things, which is, one, don't let public opinion cater whether you do what you need to do. Otherwise, you're just at the whim of the public. And there becomes a time, and this is coming from my music business background, there becomes a time when nobody cares. But if you're a musician and you still like playing music, you're not going to let that stop you, right?
True, but you do have to look at what your audience thinks.
Yeah, I mean, sure, if it's a money thing, if you're just going for money, yeah. But if it's a passion, if you want to do a podcast, who the hell cares what people think? You know?
True, but if you're trying to cater to your audience and do something that they like, you would have to get some feedback.
Yeah, okay. Well, feedback is another thing. So that's really why I brought that up. He asked for feedback, and you know what the feedback was?
What?
It's too damn long. You're not that exciting. Stick to writing.
Get an editor. I saw that one.
Oh, you saw the feedback too.
Yeah, get an editor. Yep.
So,
well, there was some good feedback in there too.
There's some good feedback,
was...
but a lot of the feedback was, and we're going to talk about this here today, talk about pattern recognition, that if a lot of people are saying the same thing, it's something that you need to look at. And he just seemed to ignore it, which actually inspired me to make this podcast. So thank you, Tim Ferriss.
He's inspiring our podcast here.
Yeah. I just thought it was interesting for a guy who asked for feedback, and then he basically ignores the feedback. He said, well, just don't listen then.
Yeah, he said it's free and you don't have to listen. So,
which is true, and I'm not. He didn't say that to me, by the way.
No, he just put that
I
on
didn't
the
give
Twitter
him feedback
feed.
because I saw he wasn't open to it.
We don't know that he wasn't completely open to it. But from that comment, it seemed like he kind of shut that person down.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if the shows get shorter. The first 3 episodes, it got a little bit shorter. I think the next episode was maybe an hour and a half.
Because that happened to Scott Stratton when he launched the Unpodcast. It was like an hour, 40 minutes or something like that. And someone posted a comment in the iTunes feed or in the iTunes comments that said something like, haven't listened yet, but 45 minutes? Are you serious?
Yeah.
And he was kind of ranting about that.
Well, you probably
one.
should listen to a little bit.
You probably
of
should
it.
listen.
Because here's the reality when it comes to length. It can never be too long, only too boring.
There it is.
That's really what people are saying. Hey, you're not that exciting for 45 minutes. Or, hey, you're not that exciting for 20 minutes in our case.
That's the thing. If
they
Tim
haven't told
Ferriss,
us that, though.
If Tim Ferriss's podcast changed your life 2 hours once a week, no one would say anything bad about that. I'm not saying it's not life-changing.
Or if it entertained us.
If it entertained you.
You sit in front of a 2-hour movie all the time.
Exactly.
But just because you can go long doesn't mean that you should. So let's get to the meat of the Red Podcast today.
Bring it on. What's the meat?
Well, I want to talk about feedback. I had feedback. I put out my first book, I think it was 1999, maybe 2000. And I thought I was the man because it was a good book. It was called How I Make $100,000 a Year in the Music Business, without an agent, record label, or something else. I don't remember the whole title. It was long.
Yeah. I would want to know that if I was in the music industry.
Stuffed with keywords. Yeah, you want to know how to make $100,000. Why not? I thought I was being smart about editing, and my sister was studying English or something at the time.
I know where this is going.
I knew some guy that was good as far as grammar goes. So I kind of skipped on the editing, and that was the feedback. It was like, hey, this guy is a total mess. Can't put a sentence together, can't spell, tons of grammatical errors. And that was kind of the feedback. So when I saw that enough, I had to go in, or did a re-edit on it, and we made it better. And certainly have done even more on the following books since then. I've had several successful books, and nobody's saying that anymore because I spend money on editing.
That's true. Was that feedback on Amazon?
Well, yeah, a lot of the feedback was on Amazon. Yeah, that's the main. Well, I won't say it's the main chunk of feedback, but there were several. There were other people that came to me.
Didn't he have? You told me about somebody who had a funny headline on
Amazon.
No.
That's the next story that I'm getting to.
Oh.
Then I had some feedback that wasn't about the quality necessarily, and how it could help me, and what I considered like good constructive criticism. I had one guy, and on Amazon, he wrote a review. It says, "A joke, just like David Hooper himself."
That's the one. That's awful.
1 star, just because he couldn't go to 0.
You can't go to 0. Can't go negative on Amazon stars.
You're right. And then he went off on me. So I understand when you get feedback, and if it's not overwhelmingly positive, there's a tendency, it's like your sphincter kind of tightens up a little bit. You're like, oh, everything tightens up, right? And you don't want to listen. But
so it sounds like for the same book, you're getting some like constructive feedback, like, hey, maybe you need a better editor. You can't put a sentence together. And then you're getting a hater here.
Well, and when these guys would throw something at me, they would say, hey, look at this sentence. This is not a complete sentence, or this is not a grammatically correct sentence, whatever. Sometimes I don't mean to have proper grammar. And that's the case, I could answer that, right? Mm-hmm. But when it's something like, ooh, how did I miss that? And when you're seeing that over and over again, yeah, you should listen to it. And they're backing it up with facts. Now, if it's just an opinion, and really a lot of feedback is just an opinion. This guy, a joke just like David Hooper himself. That guy obviously didn't like me. But here's the thing about that. I think a lot of people play way too small, and they're afraid of getting whatever they do out there, whether it's a book, a speech, a podcast. You've got to get it out there if you want to reach people. And if you're reaching enough people, some people aren't going to like you. There are people that don't like us. Can you believe it?
I can't believe it.
Yeah, well, who cares?
It's just not possible.
Well, that's fine. And in that case, what Tim is saying is correct. Hey, if you don't like it, don't listen to it. But I do think there's value in constructive feedback, and I felt like that one guy, because you can watch the conversation on Twitter. I think that's pretty interesting. That one guy had some good feedback. It's like, man, it's way too long. I don't have an hour and 45 minutes. That's important, because if this guy doesn't have it, maybe everybody's working a 4-hour work week, but like we said, that's half the work week right there.
Well, I think the average commute is 25 minutes, which is the time that most of these people are listening to podcasts.
Right. And if you go to the gym, you know this too. The average person on a treadmill or Stairmaster or whatever machine is going to be 30 minutes.
Yep. So it's
that's where a lot of this gets listened to.
Just hard to fit that in. Well, I want to talk about your book, because I know you put it out in, you said 99 or 2000.
The very first book, yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to have to, you might have to think back here, but how did you feel about those things? And then how did you react? Because I think that's important to look at.
Well, I see some people react. Gary Vaynerchuk, who wrote a book called Jab, 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 Right Hook, I think is the new one. Crush It was the big one that he did. This guy would be like, oh, sorry I disappointed you. Why don't I give you a call and I can explain everything? I don't do that. I'm not trying to win people over. Either you like it or you don't like it. And it's not that I'm sorry for disappointing you. It's not a match. So I look at negative feedback like that. At the same time, though, again, that just becomes, it's like opinion versus what really is. And if there's feedback saying like, hey, you got grammatical problems, or hey, the font was difficult to read, you can't really argue with that.
True.
Not when you keep hearing it.
True, but it still feels bad, I think, when you get negative feedback.
Yeah, but at the same time,
it's not a warm, fuzzy
super
feeling.
valuable. Well, let's take it back. So 1999 is when that first book came out, the one that we were talking about. I've had subsequent releases. I probably had 8 or 10 books since then. The last one was last year, and it was a much bigger launch. And if I had not had the feedback from the initial 1999-2000 era book, this one wouldn't have been as good. Hey, let's tell the story about that book too. Speaking of, so the book is called Six Figure Musician. This is so embarrassing, but you were involved with this.
I was.
Yeah,
it's not embarrassing.
Well, it's embarrassing that it could get that far, and I'm not quite sure how it did, because we had a lot of people touch this book. Usually, the process, just real quick, is I write it. I was working with an editor throughout the process, and I think that's really where stuff got messed up, because I was changing. There were probably some of these chapters I rewrote like 7 times, and the book itself started out at 100,000 words, ended up being cut down to 70. Note that, Tim Ferriss, because you want to keep it moving and you don't want it to be boring. So anyway, then it went to another editor, and somehow, and I'm not sure if it was like the wrong version of the manuscript got sent to layout or something, but there were problems, and sometimes there are a few problems. But I ended up, as my significant other, Laurel, you got to see the, I guess we'll call it like the galley copy, or it was a proof.
I got the first edition,
the very first one, and I looked at it. Okay, it looks great. Gave it to you, and then what happened?
Well, I was trying to be the supportive girlfriend that I was at the time. So I was like, I need to dive into this and read it, and be supportive and all of this stuff. So usually I put books on the shelf and they kind of sit around for a while, but I picked that one up and I started reading it immediately from the day you got it back. And started, like, in the first couple pages, started seeing a couple typos, and I tricked my brain. I was like, maybe it's just me, because I know he had an editor. I know he had copy editors. I know this thing has been through the ringer. So I was like, it's just me. And it was to the point where I saw a typo. You're trying to say grunge music, and you said gunge music without the R. And I told myself, maybe that's just a type of music that I don't know about. So, but after a couple chapters, I was like, well, I need to tell David what the problem is, and was able to stop you before everything launched, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah, but here's what ended up happening. Instead of defending it, instead of being like, oh, typos are in every book, and you see people doing that, or instead of telling you, do you know how important I am? I've got 7 or 8 books, Laurel, and typos are in every book, and these things happen.
Maybe you're creating a new genre of music. Gunge music.
Right. And instead of that, what did I do? I was like, uh-oh. And
you got like 5 more copy editors on it.
This thing had been laid out. We put 3 proofreaders on it, and I'm sure there's still things that got through. It's got 70,000 words, right? So some things are going to slip through, and that happens. But
you had those guys going through it twice, or 3 times, or 4 times each.
It was insane. Yeah. And like I said, I think part of the problem, we weren't used to that, because I had never. It was a new experience for me to work with an editor throughout the process. So for over a year, I was going back and forth on things, and she'd tell me to rewrite this and rewrite that, and she would put her notes in. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, sometimes like on a blog post, or I did it earlier on this episode even. I was thinking one thing and also another, and I put them together, and it just kind of got jumbled. It was a sentence mashup, and it didn't work real well. So sometimes we do that when we're writing. But yeah, I had no choice, because the launch date was coming up, and we worked quick, and we were able to get it fixed up, and nobody's really complained about that since then. Some people don't like my writing style, where I'll use sentence fragments just to keep things moving, and I have a very sales copy type style, kind of an engaged, energizing, entertaining style. I like to think so anyway. Some people don't like that. It's not formal. When I'm talking about you, I talk about you. I don't say, when one must listen to gunge music.
When he or she...
Right. And I don't use